Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Puya Delavar. Puya, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing?
Likewise. Thank you, Lewis. I'm doing great. Thank you very
Awesome.
much. It's great to be here.
And Puya, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Thank you. It's a really interesting question. I believe I've been fortunate enough to be able to find something that I enjoy doing. I spent maybe over a couple of decades doing something that didn't fulfill me. I was lucky enough to be in a position that I could leave the corporate world, which is what I was in before. And now I'm doing something that actually helps others. I enjoy it. I find it fulfilling. And I think it's been something that is very much needed in the world at the moment. I certainly needed it about 10 years ago, and I couldn't find someone who could help me. So I'm trying to be that one person for others if I can.
Awesome. So it's being the man that you needed. Is that the...
That's it, exactly. At the same time, I've got two kids, I've got two daughters, and I want to make sure that I'm the kind of role model that they would like to see as a person that they want to be with in the future, by just being around the dynamics that I show them.
Awesome. So, Puya, why don't you tell us a little bit about why I invited you onto the podcast? What is it that you do in the men's space?
Absolutely. So, putting it in a nutshell, I help men who want to rescue their relationship or they want to rescue their marriage because it's heading down the wrong direction. And I help them by going through three main phases to be able to, it's basically a self-awareness program that I offer for them to be able to be more aware of what it is that they do and how their behavior or how they see their partner's behavior can impact their relationship, makes a number of changes, then making those changes into habits, which eventually ends up creating a relationship that is extremely fulfilling and they can enjoy life a lot more. And at the same time, it saves their marriage, so they avoid divorce.
Which I think the majority of men want when it comes to their relationship. What's one of the biggest things that crops up in a marriage that maybe 5, 10, or that holy 7-year sort of itch that seems to be used in mainstream media? What are some of the big things that start to creep into marriages, or where do men start to let themselves down?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. That's something that I think we need to have a lot more spotlight on. What is that? From what I've seen, marriages fail at different ages or at different stages because of different things. So in earliest phase of the marriage, we're in this honeymoon period, everything's great. We're in it with a whole set of expectations that we might have not communicated to our partner, but we still have those and we're very hopeful. As we go through this relationship, we might have kids, and then the focus changes. So it's no longer what you aspired your relationship that you wanted to be. The focus becomes, oh, I'm actually now responsible for someone else. So what happens typically when men, especially around midlife, when they pass that phase that the kids grow up, both women and men remember, oh, actually, this is what I wanted for my marriage and I didn't get it. And that's a time where we typically go through a crisis because you remembered what you wanted, what you thought you wanted your marriage to be like. And because you don't have that and you don't have the focus of the kids anymore, you have a personal crisis that you go through, and there might be a discrepancy between what you wanted and what you're getting, or what your partner is like as to what you wanted them to be, and that causes a discrepancy, and that's where typically the marriages fall apart. So it's either very early stages where you realize, okay, you're not really a match, and or at the later stage where you think, okay, well, I've gone through this, now I want something different. That's not what my partner is giving me, so what do I do now? And you feel lost.
So I imagine a lot of men and women, when they sort of have children, start to, like you say, go into autopilot, start caring for someone else and start looking at those things. What is it that men specifically are doing that is missing the mark when it comes to their partner? Is it just purely because they've stopped paying attention, or is there just something else that is almost like not a quick fix, but something that men can start to think about when it comes to that initial step into fatherhood, so that they don't sort of sideline their partner, if you will?
Yeah. Again, that's a really, really good question. So that's something that typically we don't think about when we enter a relationship. So what we see is, we all have our own stories, and we enter a relationship with our own story, what happened to us in the past and what we expect to happen in the future. That is typically where the main misstep is, that we don't communicate that story to our partner. So we enter this huge endeavor, long-term relationship. We both want the same thing, which is the foundation that we will always have in that relationship, but we don't communicate that. So that's probably the very first, I would say, mistake that we do as men. We don't express what we feel about what we want to happen in the future. The second thing is we seem to have a certain programming, and that plays a part to our story, what we think of ourselves and what we identify as. And that is something we bring into our relationship, kind of like baggages. Either it's from previous relationship or what we've seen, the dynamics of our upbringings, or what we've seen from our parents. In any case, we bring that into our relationship. And again, that isn't communicated. That programming makes us think this is what a marriage is supposed to be. And at the same time, we identify what is success. So a lot of people that I work with, they're very career focused. And to them, success means a great job, a great title, a lot of money. And what is missing is what other aspects create success in life in general. And of course, if you let your relationship go and that is failing, but you're too much focused on your career, this misbalance is going to cause a crisis in your life.
Let's touch on that failure, because I think that's something that a lot of men hang on to in relationships. It's conversations that I've had for sure, where they feel a failure if the relationship ends. And I want to touch briefly on the first reason that you mentioned, which is you're just not a match, but that lack of communication. So do you think that's a skill set that's lacking in men, that ability to enter a relationship, have that conversation, and end it before it gets to a point where it was never going to work anyway?
Absolutely. I think it's an important one, because that is the crucial time to have that conversation, because there's no point having expectations if they're never going to be met. Expectations unrealistic expectations especially, are basically resentments about just waiting to happen. And resentments always end up in problems, so crisis. So what I recommend, especially if someone is about to enter a marriage or a long-term relationship, is really to be as open and honest as possible. Put everything on the table and say, this is my expectation. What about you? Can you express your expectation? And then we see if we are a match. If that is the case, then great. We're off on a great start. If that's not the case, then we know where we stand right at the start. And if we still want to continue, at least we have a realistic expectation of what we can expect in the future. If not, then at least, it's been communicated. So we're not going to be 10 years down the line thinking, oh, but 10 years ago you said that, and that's not happening. We knew what was discussed at the beginning. So yeah, absolutely. That communication, that openness is 100% recommended for anybody about to enter a relationship.
Do you think relationships are changing from what they were? So you talk about learning from your parents and sort of the relationships that they had, and I can talk about my parents. I'm sure you can talk about yours as well. It was a relatively early relationship. They were probably in their 20s. They got married. They had kids. And then I look at myself. I'm in my 30s. I'm not settled down. I don't have any kids. I mean, some people do, but I feel I'm becoming more normal. Do you feel that as individuals, we have so much more about us and so much more vision for ourselves that sometimes relationships can be really tested based on how much we've changed as individuals.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So I already feel a slight disconnect between me and my kids, and I don't feel particularly old until I speak talking to my kids about it. But yes, absolutely. When it came to our parents, that story that I talked about, that story that we tell ourselves about who we are, that's a very different story when it came to our parents than us. So I think in the case of our parents, it was you enter a relationship with a different mindset of what your goal is with that relationship than now. Now it feels as if there's a lot more self involved than us. So there's less willingness to make it work, so to say, than it was with our parents, maybe. And again, the previous generation, even more so. Um, I myself I had kids when I was in my late 30s, so I was probably also a late starter. But as you say, I think this is becoming the norm because we're very focused on what are we, what is our story, what is our achievement, what do we consider a success. We focus on that, and then marriage and kids and relationships comes second to that. So, and I think with our parents, it might have been different. This is probably why they entered a marriage in the early 20s, because that is part of what they consider a success. You just get married, you have a job, and so on. For us, it's more like, okay, we work on yourself, you have an education, you get a career. Along this process, you might also get married or not. You might also have kids or not. So it's a very different story. So it's important to understand what story are we telling ourselves as to what we want out of life.
For sure. It's an interesting dynamic because, like I say, I still sort of like my parents are divorced, and I think that again is more normal, right? There's more divorces. That maybe there's an element of waiting for the right one based on that scenario, and like that's sort of what you touched on before. But then on the other side, so maybe sort of stepping into your children's shoes and looking at their future a little bit, we look at dating apps and the increase in choice and the increase in options for both men and women. What effect, if any, has that had on guys that you've spoken with and relationships that you've dealt with? What's the future like for relationships?
Yeah. Ooh, if I could have a crystal ball, I would love to know that. But it is a tricky one. So um, I think our generation, or rather my generation, things were so different. It's difficult to compare it to how things are at the moment. But uh, one thing that I see that is missing these days when it comes to relationship is that screening that we do when it comes to finding a match, finding someone that we think, okay, they're a good fit for us. Because even though you said that we have more options because of the apps and everything else, what's missing is that those skills that we typically need in order to find someone, those skills are missing. So I listened to a talk the other day, and this lady was talking about having been on the tube and watching a girl and a guy, both very attractive, sitting next to each other, both on their apps, completely missing each other. And she looked into what they're looking at apps. They were both on dating apps. If the phones weren't there, they probably would have noticed each other. And so again, the dynamics are just so different, and unfortunately we seem to miss out on learning those skills, to be able to think if the other person is right for me or not. That's something that we might have had as an advantage in our early days when we found people, whereas these days it's a very different story. um, Typically, the men that I work with are more in their midlife, so they weren't the generation that had these dynamics. So I don't think I would be the expert to talk about the new Generation, it's just that what I observe is very clearly very different to what we had when we were younger. Does
For
that
sure.
does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, I guess this is sort of the follow on to that. If they know that their relationship is sort of on the rocks, why do they choose to come and work with yourself rather than go, well, the apps are available?
Yeah, you're right. No, that's really good. So some men I might have preferred that actually. Might prefer not entering into a relationship that is, that comes with responsibility, or they don't think of the relationship as long term. So that's fine. I don't necessarily try to make sure that everyone thinks of marriage as the only right solution. I help men who have the willingness to make their current relationship work. So if they see that there's no way out and that it's actually healthier to separate, by all means, I support them. But if they think, no, we have a chance, I would like to make the marriage work, I just don't have the know-how, that's where I step in and help them to make sure that they make that connection. My program is actually called Crisis to Connection. So it's important to make that connection in order to make your marriage work. And I think it's important to understand what it is that you want. And that's actually one of the first questions that I ask people. What is it that you want? If it is a long-term relationship because we're with someone that we imagine the rest of our life to be with, then that already serves as a foundation. So it's important to have that foundation. And I always say, fall onto that. So if you're going through an argument, remember that foundation, both sides, both men and women, despite what we're going through. Oh, yes, that's something we have in common. We want to make this work. Great. Okay, let's remember that and move forward. If that foundation isn't there, then of course, then the relationship is already over.
So what are the sort of first steps for a man that is maybe listening to this and going, my kids are getting ready to leave home, or they've just left for university or whatever, and they're starting to see those sort of cracks. Maybe it's a little bit colder in the kitchen. Maybe it's a little less conversation, more phones in the bed, that kind of thing. What's the first step for them to start rekindling that? Not to use a cliche word.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good word. So what I take them. So first of all, it's important to have what I said is that mindset, that understanding of what it is you want. So if you realize the cracks are appearing and that's not what you want, you actually want to stay together and you want to enjoy a relationship, not just survive it, but actually make it thrive. Now I'm sounding very tacky, but those are actually the words that I hear back from the clients that I said, okay, my relationship has never been so good. I've been missing out. So if you want to have that, then there is a way. And I have three main phases that I take my clients through. The very first phase is the most important, which is what I call the analysis phase. So you're trying to map out your relationship to understand where you're at. Where are your weaknesses? Where are your strengths? What do you typically argue about? Just so that you can take a step back and have a look at your relationship, the big picture, and understand where you're at. So once you have that understanding, then I help them through going through this ups and downs that they have. Okay, when we talk about the weaknesses, what can we do to help that? When we see the strengths, how can we use the strengths to help your relationship? So basically fill in the gaps. That is the very, very first step. And that's obviously the next two stages where we base everything on that map making that we've created, this pattern recognition, let's say, of your typical daily crisis issues that you go through. And then through what I call an education phase, which you understand where your pitfalls are and what you can do about it. We change the behavior so that, as an example, if you typically end up arguing about, for example, I'm just making an example, the dishes, it's important to understand what are you actually arguing about? What are you actually upset about? And, how many layers have come on top of that the lack that you have in a relationship that has made you either snap or say something you don't mean. So peeling off those layers and getting to that underlying root cause is something that I help, which is what I call that education. So once you understand yourself a little bit better, or a little bit, you understand yourself a lot better, and you understand your partner, you understand, okay, my partner must have said this. It might not actually be what she's upset about, but there is an underlying cause for that. If you understand that, you're in a much better position to be able to connect. And once you make that connection and you see that pattern that you typically follow in the wrong way, then you can change that. And then once you make that your new habits, then your relationship actually gets into a level that you've never had before.
Amazing. Let's talk a little bit about a conversation that we've had pre-recording, which is around men being more selfish, which seems counterintuitive based on the stuff that you've just been saying. But let's look at it from a healthy relationship point of view, and that understanding yourself a little bit more. Do you find that some of the guys that you work with, especially with this sort of age range that they're at, those relationships that they're in, are they themselves a little bit codependent on that relationship? Are they quite reliant on their partner? Do they put a little bit of maybe too much pressure on them to do certain things for them?
Too much pressure on themselves or the partner, do you mean?
So for example, they're their only sort of like support network, their only friend, like that's sort of who they put a lot of their projection
Yes,
onto.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that's definitely the case. So it's funny, we think of our partners as someone who it's normal for your wife to be, I'm again generalizing here, to be your best friend, the person you manage all your finances with, the person you raise your kids with. There's just such a long list of expectations that we have from our partner. At the same time, this is the person that you end up in bed with, or they meet your intimacy needs. It's just such a long list. And that typically in the past wasn't the case. So, but it is now. So yes, we put a lot of burden on ourselves thinking, okay, well, of course, I want my partner to be that way. What we don't realize is, of course, the partner has the same view on you. So that needs to change, yes. But at the same time, I think just awareness that we have such a pressure on ourselves, that awareness already helps. When you realize that you might have a pressure, you put a pressure on your wife, and that might be unreasonable. Just the awareness of it might change your behavior, and that reflects on how you behave with her, how you talk to her, and that reciprocates. We typically are in relationship. It isn't. If there is a separation, of course, then there is a problem. But typically, we have a loop going on. You behave a certain way that feeds back onto your partner. Your partner then reciprocates and receives behaves a certain way or says certain things, and so on. This loop continues. If we understand this loop well, we can work with it really well. And part of that understanding is having the right level of awareness of what your expectation level is, and that helps a lot. And back to your original question, yes, we do have sometimes the unrealistic, let's say, you put ourselves in an unrealistic position thinking, okay, well, I have to do this, I have to do that, just because it's been like this for the past 10 years. That's not the case. You can reshuffle your roles in a way so that it works best for you. But again, you have to have that awareness, you have to have guidance to be able to have that understanding.
And that communication, right? Like it's an open conversation.
That communication is one of the key things. That the worst situation is to be in is to not understand what is happening, not communicate that, and just have an expectation. And that just leads to resentment because your expectations aren't met, and that causes a problem 100% of the time.
One of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast is sort of men's groups and men doing other activities outside of like that sort of traditional, I'm going to go and do this with the wife, I'm going to go do this with the kids, but starting to make some time for themselves. And some of the feedback that we've received from partners is he's a new man, he's got a twinkle in his eye, just to name a few examples of some of the things that I've heard. Obviously, that initial stage of rebuilding a relationship is going to be a lot of that nitty gritty together working. But say you get through that, is that something that you'll then promote as starting to build on that foundation that you've recreated?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I ask my clients is, when do you find your partner most attractive? And the answer is always when they're doing their thing, when they're in their zone. And that's so important. If we're always trying to please our partner, then we're never finding ourselves. So we're never really thinking, okay, what is it that I want? What is it that I'm good at? independent, you can still be in a relationship but still hold on to your identity at the same time. So when it comes to these men groups, I 100% support them, obviously with the mindset of not creating distance but just having some time to yourself to find yourself. And that's so important, because you can find yourself, do your thing, as you said, recharge, then be a much better partner when you come back to your partner. You have more understanding, you'll have more tolerance towards things. When you're always in a stress level, then you can't be that kind of partner that your partner wants. And your partner probably wouldn't want that. They wouldn't have the same level of respect for you. So if you can find yourself and be in your zone and excel as yourself, and it's important to find that what that means, I think you would instantly be more attractive to your partner, and your partner probably would want you to do that. So I think it's a win-win, and I absolutely encourage it.
The word respect you used there, which is something that I'm exploring in a conversation that I'm starting to unfold. I think respect is the foundation of attractiveness. I think if a woman doesn't respect a man, then there's no chance, no matter how attractive he may be or how successful he might be. But for me, the reason that I sort of allude to that and the sort of steps that I'm taking is that self-respect is then allows people to respect you. So looking at boundaries, so looking at when to say no, when you want to play golf, when you want to go to a men's group, when you want to spend time with your mum, when you want to go and play with your nephew, whatever it might be. It's having those boundaries built into yourself. And I think for me, correct me if I'm wrong, that makes you more attractive as a man.
Absolutely. So I have some interesting stories to tell you. Obviously, I'm not going to name names, but so I have actually seen dynamics where the woman refers to the husband as the third child. Obviously, that instantly makes you cringe. I can see that. But what's interesting about it is that she doesn't see that there's anything wrong with that. She's probably jokes about it, and she does that in when we were at the barbecue, so it is in front of other friends, thinking it's okay. That bringing down that respect instantly puts the man in a very different place. So respect is extremely important. Actually, one of the things that I actually have as part of my education is there are three main needs that we all have, men and women, in a relationship, that these needs need to be met. And if any one of these or a combination of these isn't met, you end up in a crisis. You end up in an argument, and you don't even know why, because you don't realize your argument is because of one of those needs not being met. And that's what I meant earlier when I said we peel the onion, the layers, and just get to the underlying truth. So the first need is the need for closeness. Now that includes intimacy, that includes just someone's presence, just feeling that you are taken care of by the other person. If that need isn't met, again, it causes a problem. The second one is the need for equality. You need to feel as if you are a peer in your relationship. You are not below your partner, that your values, your priorities matter as much to your partner as they do to you, and vice versa. That is extremely important. The last one is the feeling of equality, that you matter to your partner as much as she matters to you. Now, typically in a partnership, in whether it's a relationship, marriage, typically one side tries to hold on to their identity, to defend their identity. The other side is trying to hold on to the other partner. And that it's a very interesting dynamic that you see. So if you're the one that's trying to hold on to the identity, you're a little bit more distant. You want to make sure you don't lose who you were. And the other person comes across a little bit needy. Now, that is typically the case with, and this is interesting to uncover. But the situation I talked about earlier really hits all of those. So you don't feel respected, you don't feel a peer, and you are not getting your needs met because the other person sees you below at the level they are. So when the man doesn't feel respected, it's almost impossible to have a relationship that works well. And sometimes the man doesn't realize it, but they do too much, and that loses the respect from the eye of the, you really need to make sure that you're on equal terms. And I'm not saying the man needs to be the dominant one. No, absolutely not. You need to be peers. You're in this together. You need to feel equals in this task. So respect is extremely important from both sides, but yes, sometimes men don't realize. They think that, oh, I want to be gentlemanly, so therefore I do so much more. What they don't realize is that on the eyes of the partner, they're actually losing that respect.
Let's briefly touch on the idea of sort of like those initial dates when you first meet someone, right? You present yourself as a polish version of yourself, right? Those first few dates that you sort of go through are your best, right? You're always on your best behavior. You're probably your best dressed. You'll have your best shirt on, your best aftershave, and you'll bring your best jokes. And that's usually what attracts your partner in that scenario. And usually, just to use a heterosexual example, is the man is the one impressing the woman, right? That tends to be the case. And there's a lot of stuff online that men try and attract up, so they try and attract above their level, so they're probably really peacocking at this stage. When it gets into that relationship and you talk about that mutual respect, do you think that a lot of men are like, I've got her in a, like, I'm married, or we've got like that, and they sort of let that facade slip? It is them, but it was just them for those first 3 dates.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. That seems to be a recurring thing with men. Um, but I have to say, it's not just men. Sometimes women, women also want to present themselves as great.
Yeah.
It's common. They want to look their best on the wedding day, but then they let go when they think, okay, well, I've got him now. But men do the same. We humans do that. It's just normal. When it comes to match or rather mate finding, we show off, and then when we think, that's okay, I'm not going to lose that person, then we let go, which is a bit of a shame. I think the cure to that is authenticity. If you don't, well, the smaller your mask, or the lack of the mask, that really shows your true self. And if the other party, if your partner or your potential wife or husband likes you for who you are at the start, you're guaranteed to know that that isn't going to change in the future, because that's who you are. So you're set. You're never going to have to live with that concern, that worry. What if I drop my mask? What if they see the real me? And then what? I might lose them. So you're always in this needy, this pretense, let's say, behavior that it is extremely stressful. So I say, right from the start, make those uncomfortable jokes, be yourself, just enjoy it. And if it doesn't work out, well, it wasn't meant to be. Actually, it's a good thing. If it does work out, great. You actually get attracted to someone who likes you for who you are. So I would say, let's do as little of that as possible. Of course, it's completely normal. I'm not saying you should go to a date in your pajamas and just act like an idiot, but it's important to know that you understand, or you are clear on what your values are, and you stick to those, and present that rather than something fake.
Yeah,
If
for
that makes
sure.
sense.
So I guess there's that one side of the coin, right, which is be your authentic self, and be who you are. But a lot of men, especially the men that you work with, right, they have drive, they have ambition, and they have goals.
Yeah.
And usually that means that they will attract a woman that also has a similar sort of thought process, and that might be in another way. And that individual will grow through their lifetime as much as the other person. What I find in the stuff that I do and the men that I speak to is that a lot of men stagnate, and that their partner, again, to use a cliche, outgrows them. And what I'm trying to encourage is that self-respect, that self-drive, that self-vision on what you want to do as a man, not just for relationships, just in life in general. So is there an element of, again, it probably comes back to that communication, right? But this idea of having a growth mindset within a relationship.
Yes, absolutely. I fully agree with you. So I have this philosophy, Lewis, called a holistic success. And I don't see success in just focusing on one area and leaving out the rest. So my philosophy of holistic success has three main pillars. One of them is career and personal development. One is health and personal well-being. And the other one is love and personal relationship. And I think it's important to give each one of these pillars the right level of attention and importance, not just letting one go. But you're absolutely right. A lot of times men do let themselves go. It's the woman that then improves herself. And we typically find mates what we think are a little bit better than us because we think we have a good deal there. If we think someone is below us, we wouldn't bother as much, or we wouldn't put enough effort in the relationship. So it's a healthy thing to think you're trading up. So you're that person is going to improve you in some way. It's great to have that, but at the same time, it's important to know what you are, who you are, what do you aspire to, and keep those three pillars always in focus. So still work on your personal development, still work on your career while you're working on your health and giving your relationship enough effort. So absolutely 100% agree with you. It's important to just be a good deal for your partner all the time, not just at the very beginning. So maintain that respect that you have for yourself so that your partner can also respect you.
Speaking of those pillars, I assume the people that you work with are the ones that let that pillar drop. Is that the most common thing for people to let drop?
Unfortunately, yes. So a lot of people drop the health. So most of the people that I work with, they focus on the career part as disproportionately and leave out the rest. So the relationship part falls apart because we're not educated enough on how we work. So we go to university, we get a job, and we specialize in one thing. So if you're an architect, you spend years studying how to be a great architect so that you get this entry point position to become an architect, and then we work on that. We educate ourselves. I would say we don't educate ourselves at all when it comes to relationships. So if we put as much effort into a relationship as we do in our career, then the relationship would, of course, thrive the same way our business or our career does. And the same goes for health. So yes, typically the men that I work with, initially at least, they've put a disproportionate amount of focus on their career and not enough on the other two pillars.
Do you think that's traditional norms coming through in a sense of no matter what, as long as I am the provider, she can't go anywhere? Kind of.
But that's the thing. That's the tricky part. So that you said the provider, and that's also something that's changing a lot. So a lot of men, not typically the clients that I work with, but I see that quite often where they might have been the provider, but they're no longer the provider. Of course, that change in dynamic creates such a big shift in relationship that obviously it puts the women in a much different peer than themselves, and then they feel like a failure. They feel as if they're not good enough, and that then creates a new set of insecurities that then reflect on relationship, which is a core formula for disaster. So yes, having that sense of purpose is very important. If your sense of purpose is that you are the provider, that you are supporting a family, keep that if that you can. If not, there's other areas that you can feel that you're providing. You can provide support and love. You can provide fatherhood. There's so much that you can provide. It doesn't mean that just because you're not financially providing to the relationship that you can't provide in other ways.
For me, I think those things to provide are more rounded. I think they are better. They may not be classically quantifiable, but I think they make you a better human anyway. I'm kind of glad that there's been an economic shift, if I'm honest. Like, it's not really a role that I would want to do if it was forced upon me. I like the idea of these partnerships, the shared weight, like from cooking, from cleaning to childcare to bringing stuff to the table. But there is an economic shift, right? And there's still traditional things held. And those traditional roles that you sort of mentioned, like an architect or a lawyer, they were sort of the roles that you went into because you could do that. But even now, on those salaries that are good, but they're not amazing, it's almost impossible to be that sole provider. So
Yeah.
things are changing, and it's how do men be more equipped for that change? Because it's only accelerating, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Um, it is very interesting how much our society is changing and the dynamics. Um, I think it's important. I go back to my point of authenticity. It's important for you to have values, identify yourself with strengths that aren't material, that cannot be taken away. If you identify yourself with your title or your position or your salary or your car or house or whatever it is that can be taken away, then you're putting yourself at risk, because that isn't really who you are. You've just created this facade that you think you are. And if once they're taken away from you, you feel as such a loss that you go into a crisis. So um, it's important to identify yourself with things that cannot be taken away from you. If you're a good husband, if you're a good father, these cannot be taken away from you. If you are providing help in the community, if you are helping others, these are things. If you identify yourself and you can then build on it, you can strengthen these values of yours. You will never find yourself at a crisis. You will always feel that you have purpose, and this lack of purpose is something that makes us feel depressed and lost. So, and again, we go back to respect. If our partner respects us for what it is that we do for the community, for the family, for everyone else, for our children, that will always remain, because you can always have that respect regardless of what job you have, how much money you make. And these things are so important. A lot of times this programming has been wrong from our childhood. This from society, we've been told what success means, and we need to rewire our mindset. We need to have the different shift to understand what is really success. And if we understand what success means to us and we stick to that, there's no reason why we cannot have a happy life.
100% agree. 100% agree. In regards to all of those things and how things are changing in the sort of men's space as a whole, what is it that you really like at the moment, and what do you want to see a little bit more of?
I would like to start with what like to see a little bit less of, and then we can go to what I like to see more, if you don't mind. What I'd like to see less of is a divide. I've seen more a divide happening between men and women. Women sticking together, helping women, men sticking together, helping men, which is fine. Helping is always great. But as long as we don't try to create this us and them situation, I think we need to understand we're in this together. We have to make it together. We cannot be in a relationship while thinking about ourselves only and thinking, okay, I don't care about it. It is vital. And I think these very negative notions like toxic masculinity and all that is creating more of that divide. I think, they're always to blame, women pointing at men, men pointing at it. This is, I think, what is causing a major shift in the dynamics that create a happy relationship or happy marriage. So I'd like to see a little bit less of those, and this is something that I'm actively trying to work with men. What I'd like to see more of is the right mindset that you don't just think about yourself. You don't think of things on a selfish level, but you think of you there for a reason. You're there for a purpose to help others as well. So you start with yourself. You go, you're the closest person to you, whether that's your partner, your wife, or girlfriend, or husband, whatever it is. Then your children, and so on and so on, and you expand on that. And I think I'd like to see more of that. And I'm happy to say that a lot of I'm seeing, well, at least from my point of view, a small shift in that mindset, that men seem to open up together a bit more than they used to. So this macho, I have to have this facade that what is man supposed to be like, that is being lifted, or men are being more authentic. It doesn't mean that you absolutely give away or give up all your masculinity. No, none of that. It's just be together, be part of a group, help each other out, be there for another man, another woman. I hope I'm getting my point across, but that sense of community, I think, what I'd like to see more of.
Amazing. Puya, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to find out more about you, where can they find you and then I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Lewis. I appreciate that. So I'm my present. The only platform I'm very heavily present on at the moment is on LinkedIn. So you type in my name, I think I'm the only one with the name that comes up. I also have a website. I'm happy to provide the link. It's literally just my name, puyadelavar.com. So I would say those are both two ways. If you're not on LinkedIn, just send me an email, puya@puyadelavar.com, and then I'll get back to you. If you are on LinkedIn, just send me a DM, and I'm happy to just start having a conversation, having a chat.